All right, guys. Welcome to this edition of the Triple Option. This is our Heisman and playoff prediction show. We'll give you who is in our Heisman race, who are some dark horses. We'll talk about who's our first four and our next four as of right now, and then who we predict to be invited to New York, and who we think will make the playoffs this year. For the Heisman race, I'll start it off. Number one, I got Mariota. Um, Prescott has had like back-to-back unimpressive weeks, and he doesn't really have the same body of work as some of these other guys. So with bad games, I think he drops a little bit harder. Number two, I had Winston. Not a lot of people have him, but I just thought that he gutted out a tough win, and he's still arguably the best quarterback in the country, so he's got to be up there. Three is where I put Prescott. Four, I actually have Nick Marshall. He's been pretty quiet, but he's put up good numbers, and he's quietly leading the number three team in the country. Number five, I have Boykin. He dropped from what I had him last week, but he's still leading the team that's winning and in the position to make the playoffs. My dark horses, I got Melvin Gordon, Amari Cooper, and Everett Golson. I think if Everett Golson can win out, then he can actually be invited to New York. The other two, I just don't think that running back and receiver are quite as popular in terms of getting votes. Mikey, you want to give us yours?
Yeah, number one, I got Marcus. Look, if we're talking about the best player in the country, best stats right now, I think you're looking at Marcus, even if he loses a game, the Pac-12 championship or this week at Utah. I think he's got a good chance. I think he's going to be going to New York for sure. Second, I got Dak Prescott. I kind of changed my theories on this, but I said Dak would probably be my number one until they lost. But as an SEC team, they're undefeated and he's leading them. But Mariota's just been way too impressive for me. It's really fun to watch. It's really a luxury, and I mean, Mariota made Darren Thomas leave early, and Darren Thomas was the leader of a national championship qualifying team. So yeah, third, just throwing out some names. I think there's a really big drop-off after this, but Amari Cooper, Melvin Gordon, and you got to keep an eye on Jameis Winston. I already know that a lot of voters have already disqualified Jameis, that they just refused to vote for him because he missed too many games this year, and they've won without him. But I think Jameis is a great leader, and like besides off the field stuff, all the on the field stuff is what you see when you like talk about Heisman. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, we have a lot of similarities, the three of us. I have Mariota at one. It's almost clear cut at this point that he's the best player in the country. It's kind of unimaginable that he hasn't been to New York yet, the way he's played throughout his 3-year career so far. Two is Prescott. He's there. He hasn't been impressive, but he's still there. They're still undefeated. Three, I have Trevon Boykin. He's been impressive. I mean, it wasn't his best game, but he's still been impressive throughout the course of the season. 22 touchdowns, throwing the ball, 4 running the ball, only 4 interceptions. And at 4, I have famous Jameis. Yeah, he's been kind of maligned in the media due to his off-the-field stuff, but he actually really hasn't done anything stupid off the field in quite a long time in Jameis time, so that's good. And then I got a lot of those skill position players kind of rounding out my dark horse Heisman. And Amari Cooper, who's just been all everything, Melvin Gordon, and Everett Golson. You're right on that pick, Blake. If he has a big game this week, he could certainly be right there as a candidate to go to New York.
Real quick, guys. I think there's a lot of guys left more than usual that could still win, possibly. I think after the number one and number two, Mariota and Prescott, I think there's a huge drop-off. But just like the number of guys that could win or could get invited is pretty high this year.
And I also think there's a lot riding on winning for the two favorites, like more so than there has been in the past. If Mariota loses a second game, it's going to really hurt him in the eyes of the voters. And if Prescott loses, I mean, his whole candidacy at this point
Yeah.
is kind of running on the undefeated season in the SEC West.
Yeah, definitely that's a good point. The past years we've had guys that won the Heisman with multiple losses, like Manziel, Tebow, guys that weren't exactly like championship winners. Uh, I think one thing,
RG3.
yeah, one thing to note in both in terms of Heisman and playoff, I think that Florida State has really kind of been written off. Not exactly sure why they're not the number one team. Mississippi State really hasn't like other than when they're kind of coming out party those like couple of weeks where they really jumped in. They haven't been that impressive. Maybe not as good as handling being like the number one team. I'm not sure, but Florida State, they won every ball game they played with or without Jameis Winston the last couple of years, and Jameis Winston himself. Uh, I actually had him in my like top 3 or top 5 since we started the show. It's kind of amazing what watching someone do in a whole game like does. You know, you watch a player and wow, that guy's good. You watch a team, wow, this team's good. So actually being able to watch Winston made me realize this guy is still incredible. And it's kind of unfortunate that most of the things we hear are about possible trouble, where in the past I know myself and Mikey kind of fell in love with Winston, like when ESPN would show like his halftime speeches and things like that, where we saw like how charismatic and how great of a leader he is.
Yeah, that was
So
his
that's
Heisman moment. Oh, sorry. That was like his Heisman moment. I felt last year.
yeah, I agree. Okay, so we'll move on to our playoff, where we have teams ranked as of right now. I'll start off with my first 4. I have Florida State number 1. Like I said, they're undefeated in like the past 2 years. It's incredible how they've been able to sustain success. Number 2, Mississippi State, undefeated in the SEC. Got to give it to them. Number 3, I have Auburn. The one loss was to number 1, and they have had impressive wins too. So impressive wins and impressive loss. That's why I have them there. Number 4, I got Oregon. I think Oregon has a lot of potential. They could earn one of the 1 or 2 seeds going forward. My next 5, I have TCU. Just right now, I think they've had some impressive wins, and their loss to Baylor was pretty tough. And I think if they played that, maybe not necessarily that game, but that scenario of having like the 21-point lead in the fourth quarter, I think they win at least 9 out of 10 times. 6, I have Bama. Bama also has a lot of potential to move up since they play the teams that are ahead of them. 7, I have Michigan State. Their one loss was on the road to Oregon, who's possibly the best team in the country. Haven't had quite the signature wins, but they do have some marquee games left. And finishing my next 4 is Kansas State. Similar situation. They have had some impressive wins, but they do play teams that are in front of them, and I believe they have to go on the road for most of their games. So if they are able to win out, they should have a very impressive resume. My prediction for the end of the season: number 1, Florida State. Number 2, Oregon. Number 3, kind of cheating. I just said the winner of the Iron Bowl. If I had to pick, I would say Auburn. And number 4, I have Kansas State. It is going to be very tough, but I think if there is a team that's able to win those games, just looking at how like sloppy TCU has been, I think Kansas State is very disciplined. So I think that they'll be able to take much better advantage of those turnovers than some of these other teams. So that's who I have making the playoffs.
Me and Blake are kind of on the same page this week. Our top 8s are actually identical. We did not even discuss this beforehand, but yeah, I got Florida State at 1, just based off 24 wins in a row, reigning national champs, and they're winning. Mississippi State undefeated as well. Been less impressive, like you said, the last couple of weeks. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, this was kind of the lull in their schedule. Their schedule's about to heat up, so we'll see how things get going here late in the season if they can turn that switch back on. At 3, I have Auburn again. Big wins. They count for something, and Auburn has a great win. They probably had the best win in the SEC all year at Kansas State, because the SEC doesn't really play out of conference, and that really has showed out for the SEC because Kansas State's been so impressive. Number 4, I have Oregon, and they They firmly cemented their place in the top four. At 5 TCU, just like Blake said, 6 Bama, 7 Michigan State, and 8 Kansas State. Um, my top four or my playoff prediction at the end of the year, kind of similar to Blake's as well. One difference being Mississippi State. I have them actually at number 2. I have Florida State at 1, Oregon at 3, and TCU at 4. There's a weird hypothetical situation that could go down where if Alabama were to lose to LSU this week, they would have 2 losses. If Auburn were to lose against Georgia or to Bama, then they would have 2 losses. And then suppose Mississippi State loses to Alabama and loses in the Egg Bowl to Ole Miss. Then the SEC is sitting there with no school with under 2 losses. Does the SEC get shut out of the first CFB playoff? It just seems unimaginable for that to happen. But it's really realistic. It's a battle of attrition in the SEC West, and the SEC needs Alabama to win this week. It'll be interesting also just to see how things shape up between the Mississippi State and Alabama. If Alabama wins the head-to-head between them and Mississippi State, but then they lose another game, does Mississippi State represent the SEC in the playoff even though they lost to Bama? There's a lot of weird things that could happen in the SEC these final few weeks of the season, but right now I have Mississippi State coming out of the SEC, and actually with 1 loss, I think they will lose.
Yeah, really quick, Mikey, before you go, I just think that Alex kind of left out an important note. Even if all those SEC teams do lose twice, you have to remember who controls the College Football Playoff Committee, and that's ESPN. Control everything.
All right, guys. My final 4 right now is different than your guys's, so I mean, I guess that's cool. Mississippi State is my number 1 right now, just because I want to go off of this year, and Florida State. They're good. They have the switch. They're lucky that they have a switch to turn to, but it kind of makes me think of them less because of that switch. Like, I want to see them play a complete game before I put them ahead of an undefeated SEC team right now, this late in the year. So Mississippi State, Florida State. Right now, it's between Auburn and Oregon, and I'm going with Auburn for now. Oregon, as weeks go by, they're continuing to cement themselves as one of the best teams in the nation, and they're furthering themselves from that injury-plagued loss to Arizona, where they're favored by like 18 points. So yeah, that Oregon is my 4th spot, rounding it out. 5th, I got Alabama. 6th, K-State. The Bill Snyder's club is just really good, and they're a lot like Alabama, a lot like Michigan State, my next team. And then rounding it out at the 8th spot, I got TCU. I'm sliding TCU back a little bit. I think they're really good, but I mean, I'm ranking them ahead of Baylor, and they lost to Baylor head-to-head, and they have the same records. I know Baylor's got a weaker schedule, but head-to-head, I mean, if we're going to argue that Oregon should obviously be ahead of Michigan State, then, I mean, I guess TCU should be lucky people are even ranking them ahead of Baylor. For the future right now, I have FSU at number 1. I think they're going to go undefeated. Mississippi State, number 2. I really like this story. I think they've played really like together and with like a lot of different guys stepping up, like Duranian or Robinson or Prescott. So it's really cool to see, and you got a nice hostile environment down there, and I just like what's going on. I think they might slip up, so I have them number 2, but I think they still may be able to come out of the SEC West. 3rd right now, I have Oregon. To be honest, if we stay healthy, I think Oregon will be able to handle its remaining schedule after they get past Utah, because they only have Colorado and Oregon State. And then Arizona State hasn't caused a lot of problems in the past years, but you never know. Taylor Coe's got some Kevin Hogan in him, but I like Oregon as like a lock in number 3, and that'll be important to note because if that holds true, then Oregon will be playing in the Rose Bowl, and they won't have to travel to the Sugar Bowl if they lock down the 3rd or 2nd spot. Of course, they could always get the 1st spot and have home field at the Rose Bowl, but whatever. 4th spot, I got TCU, but this pretty much the playoffs start this week for TCU and K-State, in my opinion. So yeah, basically winner of that, just like you said, Blake, the winner of the Iron Bowl could come out. Yeah.
Yeah, really quick, something about what you said. I definitely agree with TCU sliding. I think that if TCU played that same way against one of these other top 8 teams, that they wouldn't have come out on top. I do disagree with like the head-to-head conversation. I think that Oregon and Michigan State's head-to-head versus TCU and Baylor was a lot of different situations where Oregon just manhandled Michigan State in the second half. I believe it was 28-0, or at least 28-0 at some point in the second half, where Baylor and TCU was really kind of a fluky game. I don't really think that Baylor was just better. I think that TCU just stepped off the gas a little too early, so that's why I think that maybe that's the way the teams are rated.
And TCU was on the road in that game.
Yeah, that's true.
And not to stir the hypothetical pot, but just the possibility of a 2-loss SEC schools got me thinking. TCU has if they can get by Kansas State at home this weekend, they have their remaining schedule is light. They play Kansas, Texas, and Iowa State, and there's no conference championship in the Big 12 with little parentheses of 10 because there's 10 teams in the Big 12, which makes perfect sense. So if they run the table, it'd be hard to shut them out of the playoff. And if Michigan State runs the table, how do you shut out Michigan State? And then you talk about Oregon or Florida State potentially running the table, and you have those 4 teams who would be well qualified to play in the playoff. The SEC, they got to win, and I feel like that Bama loss to Ole Miss is really the game changer right now at this point in the season, because it's going to be tough. A lot of things have to happen, but if they do happen, ESPN could have a rough day.
A lot of things are going to happen. I have a little bit of pause for a second with the Oregon Ducks. A lot of the second half against Michigan State, they didn't have Jake Fisher. Jake Fisher is like the savior of the season, basically, seemingly like the MVP of this team, just as in pure value. He was out for most of that Michigan State second half, where the Ducks won the half 28-0. I don't know if that says something about Michigan State. I don't know if that says something about Arizona or what it says about Oregon. But that's just a little thing to note, that they did that without Jake Fisher.
Yeah, I think if Mariota gets invited to New York, which barring something crazy and unforeseen, he will, I think Jake Fisher should be riding up there right with Mariota on the plane ride.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess we'll talk about this in our predictions video, but there's some trepidation for Oregon heading into Salt Lake against a resilient Utah squad. I kind of feel like they just got that monkey off their back with that Stanford win. But this is a Utah squad that they kind of have that gritty, resilient feel. Like they're not going to go down easy. And I'm moderately concerned for the Ducks this week.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I think anytime you play a good opponent on the road, no matter what ranking they are or what history they have from the season, it's always going to be tough. Especially a team like Utah that, I know not necessarily for Mariota, but just for Oregon in general, is like a newcomer to the Pac-12, so there's not a lot of history between them. So I think that'll just about wrap up this one. Something quick I'd like to point out is that Alex was going to go to the Utah-Oregon game since he lives on Utah, but he has a Tinder date, so he's not going to be able to make it.
Yeah, that was a low blow right there. I got my University of Utah cup. I recommend if you're in the Salt Lake area, get down to a Utah sports game, get yourself one of these souvenirs. My tap water tastes way better in my Utah cup. That's all I can say.
Dang.
All right, so that's going to wrap this one up. Stick around. We'll have our predictions for Week 11. And stay tuned. We'll always be tweeting out new information and our picks and our Heisman players and just any kind of random news. Or maybe we'll just quit tweeting because the game is frustrating us. All right, thanks guys for watching.
Love.